OST 2016. This is interviews, music reviews, and more. This is The Hodder Show.
What is up, everybody? We are rolling on to you here today on episode 308 of The Hodder Show. I hope you guys are doing absolutely fantastic. Thank you so very much for tuning in and clicking that play button on today's episode of the podcast. I got a really fun episode for you here today. I told you every single week right here on The Hodder Show. I'm sitting down with my new buddy, Clem Chesterfield, who, if you are not familiar with him, is a kind of a throwback alt-country Western artist. And we have a really, really fun chat talking all about his start in music, being raised by wolves, getting into country music, his lost years playing in some rock and funk rock bands, and as well as we talk a little bit about his brand new record that came out a couple of months ago now of Lures and Love. So we have a great time. Clem is a wonderful guest, and he's actually a good friend of my good friend, Mr. Jason Reese and Jay Bridges Alerts. So we have a lot of fun on that. I want to thank everybody before we jump in on their support on last week's episode of the show, in which I did a Ask Hodder Anything, and that was a lot of fun. So thank you very much to everybody who tuned in for that. Before we jump in, if you guys are watching the video, you can see that there's quite a bit of changes happening around me here. I'm still working on my area. I think I've got the basic thing figured out of what I want to do. It's just some final touches. So if the lighting's a little weird or anything, or if I sound weird, just bear with me over the next couple of weeks. But I think we got the setup I want. So very excited about that. But with that all out of the way, we're going to jump into my chat with Clem Chesterfield. Let's get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very excited to welcome onto the show Clem Chesterfield. Clem, what's up, my friend? How are you?
Well, yeah, I'm doing just great, DJ. Thanks for having me here.
It's an absolute pleasure, Clem. I've been following your career for a little while now. Obviously, our mutual friend, Mr. Jason Reese over at Jay Bridges Alerts, got us hooked up because he said, man, listen, Clem's got a new record coming out. You got to have him on. He needs to be able to share a story with your listeners. So I'm excited to get in.
Thank you, Jay Bird.
Shout out to Jay Bird. You guys can't see it, but I'm wearing the shirt. I got to bring it up in frame here. Big shout out to our friend Jason. So we got a lot of ground to cover, man. So we're going to talk, of course, about your start in music, some influences, your background a little bit. Of course, the brand new record that came out in June. I guess not quite brand new anymore, but still brand new enough, of Lures and Love. And I love the record, man. So you did a fantastic job on it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was a collective effort of a whole bunch of great people.
Yes, the Lazy Boy Recliners.
Indeed.
Definitely. So, well, before we get into the record, let's go back for a bit here. Where did Clem get started with music? What was some of the first music you heard? What kind of got the ball rolling on Clem Chesterfield's journey?
Well, briefly, when I was young, I was taken away from a smoldering campfire in saddlebags, dragged away by wolves, and raised sort of away from all those other influences, and music wasn't really just, oh, that's kind of what I was hearing all the time. Then I hooked up with some really nice folks, and they were into old time country and outlaw country and things like that. So I definitely had the experience of hearing all, like, I'll say both kinds of country, because I believe that outlaw country became alt country and took that stream. And then there was Nashville country, and that had come from the old traditions of Hank Williams, George Jones, Ray Price, people that were brought up in the Nashville centered thing. And it became very sterile, I feel. And so then you had Willie and Waylon and folks like that sort of moved out, went to Texas, and started this side thing that was still country music, but it was outlaw country music. And so that was what I started hearing back when I was a kid, outlaw influence that was coming along. I then sort of was in a spot where I didn't really care for country music. So I kind of just went off and left that on its own with a healthy respect for the outlaws, let's say.
Sure.
Then we fast forward to, living on my own, and got into real close experience with whiskey and enjoying the good times and stuff like that as a young whippersnapper. And I sort of would get into a spot where, when you get enough whiskey in a fella, you can say and do some pretty
things you wouldn't maybe normally do.
Right. I was going to say not good or bad, but just things that you might not normally do. And during that time period, when I was quite a bit younger, some of my drinking buddies they came up with the name of Clem Chesterfield. They said, you turn right into an old-time hillbilly country sort of character when you drink too much whiskey. And I would say, I don't really know. I guess I've been blacked out for most of that time. So anyways, fast forward, and I've been, rocking and rolling and playing in, funk rock bands and stuff like that all along as I like to say, as a all country outlaw today, I like to say my lost years while I was supporting rock and roll and stuff like that. I got through that, but not unscathed. So what happened was around 2015, I was trying to lay out a new record or something, and I was trying to look for the songs that, I was going through old material. I was trying to find the new kind of where this new record was. And I kept coming up with this side thing that was these songs that just didn't fit anything. And so finally I recorded some demos of them with Luther Wright from Luther Wright and the Wrongs, another alt country performer with a made up stage name. But he said, and then, consequently playing them for a few other people, he said, well, undeniably, these are country songs that you've written here. Oh, no. How can that be?
How could this have happened?
What?
How could I write country music? What?
Yeah. So I said to myself, I says, you're going to need to present these in some sort of a manner that's going to be interesting and yet distinct all on its own. And so I was like, remember old Clem Chesterfield? I haven't seen him for quite some time. So that's basically how I came across. I'd been doing a whole other rock and roll, funk, reggae, blues thing for 30 years. And then I found myself one day with a stack of songs, and then I needed to recreate the magic of, this whiskey drinking outlaw. But part of the thing that I consciously went into when I made my first record called The Chronicles of Clem Chesterfield was that I wanted to change the dialogue and the stereotype around the cowboy. The cowboy image and the rest of it is very threatening and not comfortable for lots of groups of people. And so over the time, I realized, some of these songs also have a bit of a social conscience. Some of them, I'm not afraid to tackle, the hard issues and stuff like that. And maybe I've got this other personality that allows me to do that. So there's the birth of Clem, and then I just had to fine tune a few things, and I started out, just making some short videos, putting this persona together, and I was able to put the music in place with the character presenting it, and so that's the myth of the legend, whatever you will, of Clem Chesterfield.
The mythology almost of Clem Chesterfield, where he came from. There's a couple of things that you mentioned in there that I definitely want to go back to for a second. First and foremost, how was it being raised by wolves early on? Like you mentioned, obviously the type of music that you heard, the woo, and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Was there like a structural society they had, or was it just kind of every wolf for themselves?
Oh, I think like I really learned a lot about, pack mentality and living together, and the individual wasn't encouraged unless you were the top dog. And I realized, Clem, someday you're going to have to grow up and eat your dad or something like that, right? You're going to get yourself in a scrape and you're going to be all on your own. And it might be that you're trying to take over the pack and you're going to have to, fight your dad or one of your big brothers or something like that. And so I, instead of that, I wandered off and I found some nice folks, and they sort of raised me up. But, I think yodeling and all that sort of stuff primarily comes from that upbringing, that kind of stuff. And you realize that, they're using that as communication for different things, whether it be to mark their territory, whether it be to say, this is my home and this is my family, and everybody else better know. And so I liked a lot of the things that being raised by wolves brought to me, and it gave me a fierceness and a just
absolutely
not take shit from anybody.
Sometimes you got to let a little growl. That's definitely some good lessons to learn for sure. Oh, geez. All right. Talking a little bit about kind of the lost years of Clem Chesterfield. You mentioned obviously like you were playing in rock bands and things of that nature. Just out of curiosity, what kind of stuff were you playing at the time? What kind of was there any type of certain bands or anything you were working with? Or
well, I had a band. So I'm going to tell you, I have another part of my life that lives sort of inside of me, a little bit out of it. But it's this fellow named Tim Sheffield.
Sure.
He does a
nice
lot
guy. Nice guy.
Nice enough guy. Not as interesting as me by any stretch, but nice enough guy.
But who is?
He tends to be the guy that gets things done a little bit, right? I have to go out and ride fence lines and check stuff. I got to, watch for cattle and now I have to watch for wolves and, taking on the cattle, but it's,
sure.
I do this, like I make a tone and shake my hand, and then the wolves will just stop. And,
they know what's up.
He understands. And so good success with my cattle and whatnot. But I had a band back then, which would have been, as Tim Sheffield, called Lounge Act. And it was a trio. It was kind of funk rock. And we made a couple records and did a bunch of touring around Canada and stuff like that. And I realized that there's really no difference in the Canadian scene between whether you're doing indie rock, you're doing indie country, you're doing indie folk or whatever. Indie is indie, and you're doing it on your own. And so that time period that I had has been very influential in how I've been able to move forward and cut a bit of a swath here with my alt country persona.
Definitely so. And it's cool that you have that background. Like you mentioned, obviously it's, there's a lot of similarities in this type of, obviously, as you've already mentioned a couple of times, Clem being a stage presence in that. So it's interesting to think about, back in that time period, all of that working towards this persona of Clem that is such an interesting and, I guess in a way, powerful type of persona, right? Because it really is like when you're on stage, you are Clem Chesterfield. You're not
absolutely
someone playing.
And I wanted to be something that you would need to deal with. And so, I think when I had rock bands and stuff, there's a lot of room there for everyone to sort of be doing their own thing and finding niche markets and so on like that. But when you sort of go over into the country realm, it gets a lot stricter in terms of, there's this type of country and there's this type of country and so on. And my thing was I always felt comfortable in sort of a trio, a three-piece,
sure.
A guitar player, singer, and then I'd like to have bass and drums to accompany. But when did my first record, I did it as a trio as well, just not with drums, just bass and steel guitar and acoustic guitar. And that sort of unplugged existence was for me a real comfortable carryover from the way I was making rock and roll music too, or the way Tim was. But
the way Tim was making rock and roll.
Yeah. But as a alt country sort of slacker, that's what I call myself, alt country slacker, I realized that there was a real room here for big personalities, because there's a lot of big personalities in the country realm, in the alt country realm. And that was kind of where I went back then and started to do a little bit more research and found that, oh yeah, there's these other sort of rock bands that really had a country slant to them. And I got into the Flying Burrito Brothers and Graham Parsons specifically. He was a member of the Byrds when they did their Sweetheart of the Rodeo record. So that was a country influenced rock outfit at the time in 1968 when that record came out. And they moved forward with traditional country happening here. There was the outlaw country, which was still staying fairly true to country. And then there was this rock country. And I would say arguably the first band that really made the transition, acknowledging that they had country roots, was the Eagles. And their first couple of records, there were Bernie Ledden and guys that were associated with that real country, alt country back then. It wasn't called alt country, but it was an alternative presentation of country. And those kind of guys, then started to go, oh, okay, now let's, just morph a bit to rock. And, and by the 80s and whatever, the Eagles were a full rock machine, right? But you listen to their first couple of records from the early 70s, and they were on par to be pioneers with lots of the Burrito Brothers and trying to think of a couple others along that stream. But they were really doing something different, and they were saying, oh, we're actually rockers, but we get this country vibe and we like it. We're not being insulting. And that was my whole thing, is like, I never wanted to do this. And it hasn't been a joke, because I don't consider any kind of music that people do to be less than anything else. I think that if you do music purely from your heart, that you're going to really have a spot in people's hearts, because they'll recognize your authenticity. And so that was kind of the thing where I was like, oh man, if I had transitioned from my solid rock and roll over to this all country persona, am I going to lose people that were interested before? And I don't think I have, maybe a few, but I think mostly it's been like, oh, this is what he's doing next. And the songs are good, but, crafted with care and with attention to detail, so that you can go, oh, they look like clowns, or they look like they're, goofing off up there in their sequin suits and fancy hats and stuff like that, which I just like to call cowboy chic, for the record. It's a spot where you can easily see that we back it up with paying proper respect and homage to the people that founded this. I like to play Hank Williams as much as I like to play Willie Nelson songs and so on. And so when I write songs, there's going to be sensibility from those different camps.
Absolutely. And that's the thing too. Like, when I first was introduced to your music, like, it was, okay, yes, Clem is a fun-loving guy who likes to, dress up, and it's yeehaw, it's a good time, right? But when you hear the songs and you see your performances of you, number one, you're a fantastic musician with an incredible voice. So,
oh my God, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You're very welcome. So it's immediately, it's like, oh, okay, this is real. This isn't just like, you know, yeehaw, like it's yes, it's fun. And it's, you know, it's meant to be not taken super, super seriously, obviously. But at the end of the day, you've got fantastic songs that are real, and you can feel that, kind of that like early, like you were saying, they didn't call it alt country back then, but like the Hank Williams and things of that nature, which some might call outlaw country, I guess too. I'm not a big country guy, but like, you know, that's
all right, I'll give you your education right here.
Yes, sir. The only country I am super familiar with is like Conway Twitty and stuff like that. So like that's, you know,
but that's the original Nashville strain. He was part of that. And, you know, and I found as a kid that stuff was really hokey, you know. Yes. It was beyond the first guy. Like, man, I like to tuck my pant legs into my boots just like the next cowboy, right? But I got that from looking at Gene Autry and Roy Rogers and guys like that who I didn't think were hokey. I was like, oh, these guys are real. I'm sure it's not their real names. You know, I kind of thought that when I was young too. It's like, come on.
Is this really? Come on.
That can't be his real name. But, you know, there was a definite respect for that early thing. And then I think by the 60s, they were bringing string orchestras in to make country songs. And they were getting away from the fiddle and the banjo because those were seen as being too hillbilly. And they wanted to present themselves as this whole other thing. And the music became centered around vocalists as opposed to musicians and bands and stuff. And that's where I think somebody like Willie Nelson came along and was writing some of these great songs for some of the early pioneers in the late 50s. Mm-hmm. And then he saw this whole thing shaping up in the studio with the 30-piece orchestras coming in, and then there's just maybe a piano player and guy playing acoustic guitar, and it really got overproduced in a lot of ways. And I think that Willie and guys like that just said, I don't want to do this. This is not me. And you see the early pictures of Willie, he's all straight haircuts and suits and stuff. And that's what was required to be part of it. And he was just like, no, I'd rather smoke pot and go back home to Texas and make real authentic music that musicians are playing. Not to say that the strings aren't musicians, but
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
They were being brought out of their element to forge this new, fully produced and wicked sound thing where it was like, well, what about the guys that just sit around and play guitar and fiddle and mandolin?
The chords and the truth.
Those guys, right? Wow. So there was a period where they weren't getting any play. They weren't getting recorded. They weren't getting asked to do anything. And Willie, and then, guys like Waylon, they were in the original scene, broke out and let their hair grow. And, probably a lot of it was based on, one of the things that I really find interesting is that whole 50s and 60s and even into the 70s strict country thing was ruled by heavy alcohol use and abuse and amphetamines. And it was the secret of the industry that all these straight-laced country boys and everything like that were all on speed, and they were doing a completely different thing that didn't feel very organic to some of these other guys. And so, and if you smoked pot, you were just some kind of a hippie, dropout that didn't have any ambition. Mm-hmm. And I felt like, looking back on the whole thing with the, in the 70s, I got to hear the outlaw music, and I wasn't listening to the straight country by that point because I wasn't hearing the Hank Williams and that kind of stuff.
It's a completely different vibe.
And even the guys like, say, George Jones, he was a later guy that turned out to be a rebel outlaw, just in the same caliber
Absolutely.
as Willie and Waylon. But during that time, he was being put in this box, and it was tough, and it was a thing that I think it got easier to be yourself. I think it got easier to just play the songs that were on your heart from the outlaw camp, and we're fighting. There was Jessie Coulter was part of that too, which was Waylon's wife, and Tom Paul Glazer, and there was just some different approaches to how the music would get done, and it was, in my opinion, more organic in the 70s, and that laid the framework to. And if you want to, keep going, because I'll never shut up, but it turned into the social conscious movement that the traditional, Nashville side of it never really got into. And that's like how you wound up having things like Farm Aid and the Bridge Project that Neil Young does and stuff, because, Neil was a rocker that also played old time country sounding from time to time, and would alienate bits of his following when he would do that kind of stuff. But as it turns out, history has shown that he was more lined up with Willie and Waylon, whatnot, in his attitudes and stuff. And those guys are the ones that started to have the voice for the farmer, that started to open up people's eyes to different things that were going on. And you still had this gloss veneer of what was on the radio and what was coming out of Nashville as an opposition.
Mm-hmm. One of the most interesting things I've had as far as an education on that, I think it was like the early days of Willie Nelson's career, and that is mainly, so my grandfather was a huge fan of Chet Atkins.
Sure.
And especially more the early stuff, before he kind of got into production and stuff. Because I think he was instrumental in probably
helping to create that divide.
Yes, he was.
He got very slick. Fred Rose and Roy Acuff, those guys, and Chet Atkins, they all set out this new sort of path for the country music. Yes. They were good. They were good musicians. They were incredible musicians. And so they saw this bigger produced thing, this larger body of stuff. But you're right. They were before that little move. Mm-hmm. I have a bunch of Chet Atkins country records where he's an instrumentalist mainly, and he brings in somebody else to sing.
And there was a live video that my grandfather had, and I can't remember. I want to say I think it was in either the late 70s or early 80s that he did this collection of, he brought all these musicians together that he had worked with in the past. Right. And I couldn't tell you who any of them were, but at one point he starts talking about this star. And he said, the second I saw this guy, I knew he was going to be something, and blah, blah, blah. And brings out Willie Nelson. Mm-hmm. And this was when Willie was, he was full on long hair outlaw. Like, he was not being played on the radio. But Chet still was like, we need to honor Willie because, it's
because he wrote Crazy.
Yeah.
Like for Patsy Cline and like Hello Walls. Like he wrote some of the early classic songs that, probably set him up for life, that he probably didn't have to do his whole solo career afterwards based on the sales, although they were pretty notorious for not giving out, being stingy with the royalties and things like that. And, just by being one of the owners, you got your name on the song as a writer or something, so it was a pretty monopolized thing. And there was, in some of the history that I've read through about some of the different guys, they were actually just outright shut out from being able to record or perform and so on, because they just weren't doing the company line that Nashville wanted to be represented at. And so I always make it sound like, oh, Willie just had enough and packed up and went to do his own thing. I really think that he wasn't getting he wasn't seeing himself in this new environment of the 1960s.
Oh, for sure.
formal country music. And so he kind of said, I need to make some distance. I don't think he went to set up a new area. There was also Bakersfield, right, out in California, and that was Nashville and Bakersfield. And Bakersfield eventually attracted all the alt country rockers that would be there. That's where all the hippies were, and that's where, when they were making their way at Laurel Canyon in California in the late 60s, where the Byrds were hanging out. The rock bands of the time were hanging out there. But then there was also the guys like Graham Parsons and Chris Hillman and these guys that were totally rockers at their core, but fundamentally love to play this country influenced music. And it always comes back to, in any of the readings I've done about that era, that out in Bakersfield and the West Coast and in LA and stuff like that, they're all smoking pot, and it was not as focused on the whiskey drinking life that Nashville was still kind of portraying around a little bit and stuff. And they would have musicians come from Nashville, and they were still straight, short haircuts, wearing suits, but they're doing speed. Yeah. and so they're like, I don't even know what's going on out here with you hippies. Let's play piano.
Yeah, and it's just like, you guys are going crazy out there. What are you talking about?
Yeah. So I feel like too that there was a tempo of like there was a definite culture shift. History shows us that, but this Nashville versus West Coast Bakersfield thing, and then Texas came into it shortly thereafter, and so you had a big mix of different centers of where country was sort of coming out of, and you could almost tell by their sound if you were in the know at the time. Oh yeah, that's heavily produced Nashville stuff there. Yeah. And then, that stuff, there's some Buck Owens stuff there out of Bakersfield. It's really rollicking. He brought, maybe a horn section in for some of it and had its own taste. And then you went and down in Texas, it was all, they were starting to play drop D and
yeah.
And this real stuff where you could see the dust coming up off of them when they played, kind of thing, which was probably had never changed in Texas swing and the honky tonks and all that. That thing was still going, and they were probably mostly just saying to Nashville, no thanks.
They didn't want any part of that. Yeah.
Really great, honest thing going on here.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because speaking on, rockers who made the transition in the country, and that it's something that has kind of happened again with music from my generation, where now there's, probably the best example I have of that is someone like Aaron Lewis, who he was, I'm a huge Stain fan. So like the next thing you know, it's like, hey, he's doing country. And right. When he started out, it was the singer songwriter. It was very produced. And I was kind of like, okay, it's kind of like the country on the radio, but he's not singing about the same bullshit. Right.
Yeah.
And then he dropped his record Sinner. And I was like, whoa, okay, and he said right away, I remember there's a live video of him saying when he debuted one of the new songs, it was That Ain't Country, the song's called. And he said, guys, it's honky. It's very honky. And right away, like slide guitar and everything. And I was like, this is swinging. And I'm like, okay. So like, it's something that has almost happened again. Obviously, it's not quite to the same extent because it's still not quite that alt country, outlaw country of that time period, but there's a few other guys off the top of my head. Like, oh my God,
I would throw out like Chris Stapleton.
Yes,
is a dude that when he first broke out, a couple people said, oh, you got to check out this guy. Like, he's what you're talking about, singing songs, and they're not overproduced. And so I probably checked out a couple of videos, and then I grabbed his double record there that had the Tennessee whiskey on it. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I was like, wow, this sounds like my first record in a lot of ways. The Chronicles of Clem, it had nice steel guitar. It was sparse with, just really relying on his beautiful, rich voice. And I started to go, this guy isn't taking shit from the other side.
Yeah.
Now, and got a lot of credibility, got a lot of fan support, and suddenly he can do what he wants. And I think that's part of it, almost to your point, is when you are starting and if you've got any industry interest and so on, you kind of have to make the record they want you to.
Yeah.
And then if you can establish your own niche or a following or whatever, then you start to get to maybe get your own voice out there a little better. And it's been going on forever. You hear the hit song from the band, and then you go buy the record, and none of the rest of the record got one song. It's like, well, they probably bought that song, or it was owned by their label, mm-hmm. or somehow got it and made a recording of it. Whereas the band really sounded like this, and that the rest of their writing wasn't up to that same level, or it was
so different.
Yeah, it was so different. And so the industry's changed so much over the years, but I still feel like there's still, you have to break into what whoever it is that's behind you wants and wants your thing to look like or sound like. And if you're new, it's just going to be pretty much what is across the board and successful, unless you can then break and maybe make a new thing. And there's very little room to make new things these days. It's kind of all been done, right? I mean, even in my songwriting, I feel like it's cutting and pasting a lot. And the deeper your knowledge is and the more experience that you have, maybe the better the cuts are and the pasting.
Everyone's borrowing from something in one regard, right?
Yeah, and if you don't, that's why I like to pay the tribute to the first guys, the Jimmy Rogers, even, who's arguably the first guy, the Carter family. But these are the people that we owe the tribute to, mm-hmm. And then further to that, if I want to do alt country and I want to do this alt country slacker life and support those kind of things, then I need to know that and know what those people are doing. And that for me defined a lot of the character that I built of Clem Chesterfield, because of that, what I mentioned, trying to make sure that there's a social conscience involved.
Sure.
That I am not just furthering stereotypes, especially the negative ones. And in Canada here, we've been struggling with our First Nations, mm-hmm. how that's all going to settle out and how we're going to reconcile. And we're in a very important period where listening is what we're being asked to do as settlers and as colonialists, that there's no denying what has happened. It's just, are we willing to acknowledge our part in it? And so part of this for me, it was very controversial in my own mind to take on a cowboy persona, because I don't believe in a lot of the hardcore stuff that can sometimes be seen as negative.
Sure.
Around the cowboy brand. And so one of the things that I can do is take humor into the approach of it. I can also make, at all my shows, since we've restarted in July, I do a land acknowledgement. And where I am in particular is traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat. And just starting with that, if that alienates the cowboy culture, or the air quotes cowboy culture, or the sensibilities of the people who have perpetrated this all along, then I'm happy with that. I'm okay with that. I'm
absolutely
Chesterfield, and I got a bullwhip. I got a couple. I got a 25-foot one, and I got more of a 6-footer. My 6-footer is for keeping COVID at bay.
That's for keeping away the COVID.
6-footer.
Keeping the vid away.
6 feet away from me, buddy. I got a bullwhip. But the whole thing comes back to acknowledging where you're from, mm-hmm. and where you want to go. And in this particular case of a cowboy stereotype, the damage that's been done.
Sure.
And so that's kind of where this inclusive cowboy comes up. I don't discriminate against any of our LGBTQ2 folks. I'm a big supporter of any of the BIPOC and Indigenous folks, and then I support women as an ally as well, because there's a lot of problematic and troubling stereotypes.
Absolutely, yeah.
That go along with how women are treated. So I'm on my first, between my first record and my second record, and it's on my second record, I wrote a song called "Don't Be an Asshole, Man."
I was just about to say that. Yeah,
it's a hashtag Me Too support. It's taking the figure of the macho man, the cowboy, and here I am, Clem Chesterfield, and saying, actually, it's not okay the way we've been doing it, and that we need to really be aware and conscious, and then be allies to changing that dialogue around how women are treated as just one of these groups, right? And then having the cowboy that isn't afraid to say you're wrong, and history will show that me and my bandmates and the folks that we hang out with are right.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And that's the thing too, right? Like when you're, excuse me, like as someone who was not super familiar with yes, I grew up in a small redneck town, air quotes, but like, I, from what I knew of the cowboy, lifestyle and that, it's not a lot of positivities when it comes to things of that nature. So it's cool to hear that that's something that you are kind of tackling head first, right? Especially even something like with the land acknowledgement, like that's such something right away that people are going to be like, oh, like, it's not something you see very often from that world.
Yeah.
Right?
And I have had a really positive response to it. You personally, I felt like, man, in some small communities and some areas around Canada and stuff, I may run into some pushback to it, mm-hmm. and so on. And if that's the case, then I need to be ready to take that on. And your argument doesn't stand up in my thinking if you're defending any of that kind of stuff. And so artists don't always take up the task, right? And in music particularly, it's been a little slow on the uptake, I think, of the Truth and Reconciliation, because it's not popular in some ways and in some areas in Canada. And so being able to know that the reinforcement comes from hearing back from, say, someone who may be Indigenous, that, man, you weren't what we were expecting. In fact, that one fellow told me at a show a month ago that he was offended when I showed up, to be honest. And he said, I was not happy to see your cowboy persona. And and so on. And he was staff, so he had to be there. And at the end, though, he was just like, I've never seen anything like that. He said, I was not expecting that. He said, I've never felt seen in that kind of an environment. You know, it's all offensive. It's all going to be, you know, me as a, you know, not me, but him saying as an Indigenous person, seeing just that stereotype brings so many bad images to mind, and so many, there's a lot of negativity that has been built up over a couple hundred years. And so to start with a land acknowledgement immediately establishes that I'm not your dad's cowboy or whatever.
Yeah, you know, there's a difference.
Time's changing, and that, you know, I debated with whether we should just leave the cowboy out of the conversation. But I think that, you know, when you go out west in Western United States or Western Canada, the ranchers and farmers and so on have it's a practical look. Your hat and your boot work. And, you know, the fact that then it got turned into all the negativity that came out of early Hollywood movies and all the us and them with Indigenous people, it stands to reason that this could be troubling. And so I don't want it also to be troubling to the folks that this is their life. This is how they work. And Indigenous people wear the same outfit out west in a lot of cases because it's practical. They're working on farms, they're working with animals, or, you know, working the land. And these things were developed as work tools, the hats, the spurs.
It's not necessarily a look like, oh, I want to be a cowboy. It's like, you know, we're trying to.
When we were kids, we did, because it was a narrative. I mean, I'm probably a little bit older than you. And, you know, when we were kids, it was all those kind of games that we were playing because that's what we saw on TV. And, you know, for some reason, I always wanted, I identified with the Indigenous side. And because I always thought that they were better at what they did than the cowboys, and they thought that they were more thoughtful. And I was always very connected to the woods, and I was a country boy at heart, and I really saw that there's a more sustainable way to live. And I touch on that in my work as well, about pollution and climate change and things that are practices that just aren't sustainable today. And so I do take on a lot of different things, but I'm trying to just make a unified thing of there's a different image, and that kids could grow up and feel comfortable with this practicality if the right acknowledgement is made in places, especially to the hardworking people, that I'm not making fun of your lifestyle because you wear a cowboy hat and cowboy boots and you know, fancy shirts when you go out dancing, because it's just an extension of what you're doing on your day-to-day basis. Yeah, maybe you got a nicer hat to go out at night than during the day because the work one's all covered in sweat and dirt and the rest of it. So I'm trying to walk a fine line, and it's through my music that I present humor and I present real life people and situations in my stories.
Definitely so. And that's the thing too, right? Like, you know, when you get down to it, it's, you know, what you're doing is, as much as, yes, it is entertainment, and it's, you know, obviously that is part of it, but you're trying to have a voice on top of that. And you're trying to, you know, do your part to, you know, bring positive change with this image and everything. And I think it's a really wonderful thing to see, man. And talking about the actual record here for a second, of Lures and Love, you mentioned Don't Be an Asshole Man, which that was one standout for me, where when I heard that song, I was like, okay, that I got to ask about that. But just for a minute here, like you've already kind of sort of touched on a little bit about the record, but when you started getting this collection of songs together, you and the group, was there a certain point where you were like, okay, it's time to make another record? I know what I want to do with this. What was kind of the overall vibe that you wanted for this record?
Yeah. So back in the fall of 2019, before the pandemic started, I was formulating. I had at least half the songs written and done. I don't have a super collaborative work ethic when I'm writing. I more write and bring the songs and present them to the band and let them put their own take into it. I don't tell people how to play their instruments, but I choose people to play with that I think are going to do a great interpretation or something like that. So I started to demo in the fall of 2019, going into 2020. Pandemic hit, and I had to decide what I was going to do with these. And I'd been chatting with some other folks at some other labels about how to present this and if working together with them might work. But I finally settled on working with Chris Brown at Wolf Island Records. And they have a small stable of really great singer-songwriters, mostly, little bit of band type presence, but mostly singer-songwriters that have a body of work ready. And it's a collective record label, so they're not offering anything. Most labels these days don't really offer much in terms of, it's not the old days where they give you the big signing bonuses and stuff. And those days are well gone. But having, as I mentioned before, having always sort of played in a trio, maybe a 4-piece, I had been, since the Chronicles record, which was a 3-piece, I had started to bring a band in: drums, bass, guitars, fiddles, steel guitars, beyond just the little trio. And so live, it was working, and we're working on dynamics, and we're trying to figure out, how does a 6 to 9-piece band play together without just sounding like a big mess. And that was probably the biggest attraction that I had towards going with Wolf Island Records. Was Chris had some experience with some pretty big bands, and he was one of the founding members of the Bourbon Tabernacle Choir out of Toronto back in the 90s. And they were a large band and very, very big sound, and everybody had their thing. So I always went back to, this guy knows how to do that. And so when we got together in the fall of 2020, we did a few production sessions where I laid out the songs, and we went back and forth on arrangements and so on. And then I had a smallish core of musicians that were part of the Lazy Boy Recliners. And then I brought guests in, and we amped it up, and Chris played piano and keyboards on it. And so the Lazy Boy Recliners is a loose collection of a bunch of different people that may show up at a gig, but may not be every time. There's small core, and then we fill it out with more.
With what you need. Yeah, obviously not. You can't always have the same person doing the same instrument if, That's
right, especially if you're busy. And I mean, we're just coming out of this pandemic in a lot of ways. And so getting busy is what we want to do. Mm-hmm. And so finding a way to make it all work is super important. So that was where I took the songs, and then we crafted them into the arrangements that they are. Although live, we were mostly playing this record, I think, more or less. There was a couple of new songs that were new to the band sort of around the recording time, but mostly we'd been doing the work and the songs as a body, mixed in with the first record, which had to be all reinterpreted because it only had bass and steel guitar and acoustic. Sure. So all the extra instruments that were in the band now were a new sort of formation. So record 1 to record 2 in the Clem Chronicles are pretty different sounding, very, very, very different sounding, in fact, because on the new record, it became apparent that with really great singers, Damien Van Johnson, Patrick Thompson, and then we had Sarah McDermott from Wolf Island join us on a few. And we've developed this choir of really beautiful harmonies and so on. And that sort of became the center point of the record. Then how does the fiddle, how does the steel guitar,
does that all work in?
Guitar all find their space without just making a mess, a big, sonic, whoa, that's just everybody coming off. And
it's a bunch of noise.
Chris Brown's experience for really being able to flush out the song and hear the pedal steel picks up and really it features right here, and then boom, it's back down, and now we're back into whatever. And so that was kind of the process, I think. And as we got to recording, we might have maybe non-pandemic done it in little bit bigger groups, sort of in the studio live off the floor, but it really limited us to recording one person, maybe two at any given time. And so from that point of view, it was crafting it all to fit and take everybody's parts, put them together, make a really nice cohesive sound overall. And then we, the plan is to make vinyl, make CDs, and work on getting this record out there. And it looks like 2022 is going to be when we really get to hit the road and get back on track, which is fine. It's important to me that people are safe, whether they're in the band or whether they're in the audience. And so I've been lucky enough since July to be playing every weekend, couple shows, and then, 1 or 2 during the week, just mainly solo, outdoors, that kind of thing. And the band has played 2 sort of release parties again for our local Kingston, Ontario sort of area. And so, I'd love to be playing more with the band, but right now we're rehearsing that we sound like the record in a lot of ways, in terms of it's a great template for us. And we're really excited to expand it into festival season next year, and really want to get out west where we can, see how the inclusive cowboy does.
Doing it west,
Meet up every night after a show.
Bring the bullwhip.
Bring the bullwhip, exactly.
That's fantastic. Well, the record is fantastic, guys. If for some reason you haven't heard this record, go check it out. Of Lures and Love. It is awesome. And like we mentioned, Clem, maybe some file will come in next year, some more CDs and things of that nature. If you guys have a chance to check out Clem play live, do so. He is fantastic. I hope to be able to catch you at a show sometime coming up. We've
got one more show for the season right now that's at the Cove in Westport. It's a really nice restaurant, and we're doing a dinner show. So it'll be one of our very few indoor shows, but they're super prepared, and they've got a really nice space where everybody can feel comfortable in the audience. And if anyone would really like to see this band and you're in the Ottawa, Kingston, Trenton Triangle or something like that, Westport, totally doable. And it'll be a really nice kind of place for us to just, establish that we've got our act ready to go and ready to take out. But I think that we're still probably going to be waiting through the early winter.
Yeah, early 2022. Yeah.
Wolf Island Records has a tour tentatively planned right now to take us to Europe in the spring.
Nice.
So that'll be pretty exciting. We won't probably take the whole band. I'll take myself and smaller sort of version. When Wolf Island Records before pandemic was touring, they would take the singer-songwriters and then drummer, bass player, kind of extra musicians that could play with everybody. And
right, yeah, less
economy.
People to worry about.
So we'll probably do something like that to start out with. But the record is being distributed by CRS, Continental Record Services, and they're based in Holland. And so that's kind of the center point for Europe for getting this going. And then, like I said, we really have on our radar to play as many of the country festivals and folk festivals and stuff like that next season across Canada.
Awesome. Well, sounds great, man. I'll be looking forward to seeing that. All the best with that, Clem. It's been a pleasure getting to talk with you and learning about your history and some history with the alt country too. That was really fun. A lot about that.
Oh yeah, and everybody says, "Oh, Clem, he's an encyclopedia."
Fantastic.
Whiskey drinking, maybe. Woo!
Woo! All right, let's get some whiskey.
Yeah!
All right, thanks so much, Clem.
Thanks, TJ. Thanks for having me, man. Love your show.
All right, folks, there you have it. My chat with Clem Chesterfield. That was a great time. Clem is a fantastic guest, and his buddy Tim's a nice guy too. So he's a guy who gets all the stuff put together and everything. But let's be real, Clem is he's the star. So definitely a lot of fun on that. Thank you very much, Clem, for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much for tuning in. It means the world to me. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this chat, be sure to check Clem out through the links down below in the description of this video or of this podcast. If you're listening on the Stitcher or the Spotify or Castbox or Anchor, however you're listening, I'll have something down below in the description. I have a link to Clem Chesterfield. Check out his album, Of Lures and Love. It is a really fun time, and it's been a fun time hanging out with you guys here today. Thank you so very much. Don't forget, I got some so cool stuff coming in October here. We have an interview that is going to be some paranormal related stuff, so I'm very excited about that. And then I have a bunch of content I'm going to be recording over the next week for you guys for some story related content for Halloween. So very much looking forward to that. Hope you guys are too. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Give you the old patented audio fist bump and the old video fist bump. Boom. Thanks so very much again for tuning in. I'll catch you next time on The Harder Show. Take it easy, guys.